All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hi, everyone. This is Tom Salemi, Editorial Director of DeviceTalks. Welcome to this week's episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly podcast. We're going to do things a bit differently this week. My podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, the Executive Editor of Life Sciences here, will not be joining me. Instead, I will have a one-on-one conversation with Nadim Yared. Nadim is the CEO of CVRx. He is the past chair of AdvaMed, so he brings a great deal of perspective to the conversation. We'll talk to Nadim about his path into medtech, about his decision to join a startup. It's kind of a harrowing conversation, but worked out well for him. And we'll talk about how CVRx has navigated some huge but somewhat troubling areas within medtech. So Nadim is a great guy to talk to. Lots of terrific perspective. I know you'll enjoy this conversation. In fact, I recorded this conversation back before the pandemic. So I felt obliged to reconnect with Nadim last month. We talked a few weeks ago to update on the pandemic and to talk about some other more recent challenges facing not only medtech but the world. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to run this conversation that I had with Nadim about his career and his life in its entirety this week. And then next week, I will run the follow-up conversation I had. So this is sort of a two-parter. I think it's totally worth it. Nadim's got lots of great thoughts and ideas, and I know you will enjoy these conversations. A few programming notes. Number one, I will be off next week, but we will be posting this podcast, or as that I mentioned earlier. Number two, we will not have a Device Talks Tuesday this coming Tuesday, but we'll be back on July 14th, Tuesday, July 14th, with a really intriguing discussion about startups, running startups in the pandemic. So we'll be talking with three CEOs from the companies that we had identified as companies to watch, and we will have them on a panel. Chris Newmark and I will talk to them not only about their companies and their specific challenges, but also about how they're operating startups during this time. Fundraising, regulatory, clinical, we'll try to hit upon all of that. So don't miss that conversation. You can go to devicetalks.com to register for that. We have a few other Device Talks Weeklies coming online, so keep an eye. We'll be announcing them through our normal channels and also on this podcast. Now, let's get into this conversation with Nadim Yared, the CEO of CVRx. Well, Nadim Yared, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom.
So you've been a busy person in medtech, and we want to cover not only what you've been doing for the industry on a broader sense with AdvaMed and other organizations, but also progress at CVRx, which is really one of those medtech stories we love to cover that are pursuing big ideas and are finally getting some traction. And we'd like to talk about that in a bit. But first, I'd like to find out a little bit about your journey into medtech. How did you find your way into this industry?
I would say half luck, half destiny. When I was doing my engineering degree in Paris, I was looking for an internship between my, the equivalent of the second and third year. And GE Medical has a good research center not far from Paris near Versailles. And I got an internship with them to do image processing for their next generation platform for CT scanners and MRI scanners. Very exciting development at the time. The other choice, my specialty for my major when I was studying engineering in Paris was image processing, digital image processing. So I could either go into military, space applications or medical at the time. With my background with Red Cross, my father being, having been a doctor all of his life and having grown up in this environment, I was more attracted to the medical space than the military space. And There was also another reason. I'm at the time, I was a Lebanese citizen and working in the space or the defense industry in France. Being a Lebanese citizen is hard, as you can imagine. So uh, I ended up working with GE, doing my internship there, developed the first generation of their Advantage workstation platform. And this was in 1992. So a long time ago.
Did that internship turn immediately into a position? And if so, how did that happen?
So at the time, GE was developing an independent console to relieve the time pressure on their CT scanners. So they wanted to provide a solution to their customers to allow more patient flow into these scanners. So all of the processing that was done on the CT scanner, they wanted to offload and put it in an independent workstation. So they have developed this hardware with 4 big screens, all dedicated hardware. And my internship was to develop a development environment to allow engineers to not have to have access to this big, expensive hardware when they're testing their software. And I end up optimizing that software and making it so fast that it became the product itself. In a way, we were able to put on a desktop computer all of the processing power that required dedicated hardware through the optimization I did. And that became a product called Advantage Windows and later on renamed to Advantage Workstation. And with the success of this product, GE decided that they want to invest in it. And at the time I was doing my internship, so I was a one-man show doing it, and they decided to keep me working on it during my engineering years. So I had a part-time agreement with GE to do this. And I graduated on July 9th, 1993, but I was already a full-time employee with GE a month before that, continuing the development of this work. So it kind of morphed from an internship to a part-time job to a full-time job with GE.
Was there any part of you that wondered if you were qualified for that sort of work? They give you a lot of responsibility as an intern. Was there any doubt?
No, at all. Overconfident.
Good for you. I guess that's the secret. So you parlayed that and you became general manager of X-ray in Europe for GE Healthcare, if I'm getting your title correctly. Point is, you got into management. Did this overconfidence sort of put you on a track to be a leader? Or did you see yourself as primarily being an engineer and remaining an engineer for a long time?
Once an engineer, always an engineer, right? Tom, it's interesting because I love engineering. I love the work I was doing. But after a year and a half of doing what I was doing at GE as a full-time employee, i.e. an engineer, I was promoted to become an engineering manager with 23 engineers reporting to me. And why did they promote me so early? Maybe I was very outspoken and I had big ideas and overconfident, right? But I was the youngest in this team, and I was managing all of those engineers. And I did this for a year and a half, and then I took a year sabbatical to do my MBA at INSEAD. And then GE funded all of this. And when I finished the MBA, I returned back to GE, became a product manager, then a segment manager, then general manager. Each one is 1 year apart. So I became a GM. I probably not 29 or 30-year-old, so pretty young.
Wow. How do you, as a leader now, how do you respond to someone who comes in very confident in themselves? I don't want to say overconfident, but young, confident, willing to express themselves. Do you see that as traits you like in a person?
Oh, I love it. I love people with edge. At GE, I was mentoring a lot of the high potential students who were, hired by GE or recruited by GE into their leadership program. And I love talents like this who are aggressive, who, don't stop in front of obstacles, who think they can change the world. And many of them do end up changing the world. Many of those young engineers I coached over the years became CEOs in either medical or other industries.
Are those traits common amongst engineers? Are they encouraged to be, I don't want to say overcome. Are they encouraged to be confident in their positions and their abilities and to sort of push forward, or to be more part of a team?
I would say not enough. Edge sometimes is annoying. Many managers feel threatened by engineers who have edge. They also feel threatened by engineers who've got a lot of passion. Also, taking risks in larger organizations and larger teams sometimes is, how do I say, discouraged by some of the middle managers. As a young engineer, someone has to have the luck to end up being in a good group who values edginess, who values, creativity. And it's hard these days. It's probably harder. We tend to be a little bit more conservative once a company is established.
Interesting. I guess it's be true to yourself. I mean, just if your nature is to be edgy, then be edgy. But I think to fake or force edgy probably doesn't work in your favor.
Absolutely not. Faking it does not work. Yeah, no.
So how did you move on from GE Healthcare to Medtronic? That was in 2002.
Yeah, long story. So I when I was promoted to be a segment manager at GE, they gave me a business called the fluoroscopic C-arm business. So those are X-ray machines used during orthopedic or vascular surgery. And the GE business was number 4 behind OEC, Philips, and Siemens, number 1, 2, and 3. And under Jack Welch, you have to be number 1 or number 2. And if not, well, you have 3 choices. You can try to fix the business, or if not, you'll have to sell it, or if not, you'll have to close it. You have no other choices. And I was number 4. I decided I want to be number 2 or number 1. I don't want to fix it, or I don't want to close it or sell it. The factory for that business was in Belgium. So I moved it to India to lower the cost. I changed the distribution in the United States from direct to indirect because those are surgical equipment, not radiological equipment. So it's a different sales force. I was concerned at the time when the product was distributed by a channel that sells CTs and MRIs. My product was a tenth of a cost of a scanner. So of course they will sacrifice it in order to sell the CT, right? So they would not focus on the sale of a fluoroscopic CR. Doing this, increased our sales by about 45% in the first year. So I felt pretty good with it, but we were still number 4. So I decided we need to buy number 1, OEC Medical. And I made the case to Jeff Immelt and then to Jack Welch, and he approved it. So we did the acquisition. And when the acquisition happened, Jeff Immelt was my boss, asked me to move from Paris to live in Salt Lake City and do the integration of OEC Medical, which I did. And while running the integration for OEC Medical, we identified that we should acquire the navigation portfolio from Medtronic. And I ran this project until I was promoted to be the general manager of X-ray in Europe for GE. So I led this out, moved back to Paris. The deal with Medtronic did not happen because the spine business under the leadership of Michael Demain felt that navigation is crucial to their spine business. And they decided no, they want to build it up, and they loved the way I was doing, the vision for that business inside GE. So they recruited me from GE to fix that business for them and grow it. And I accepted the challenge. I moved to Colorado, Boulder, to do this, and that's how I joined Medtronic.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize there was a connection with Mike Demain there.
I love that business, the navigation business. I felt we can do a lot of things. It was much smaller than the business I was running for GE. But in the same token, my wife loved living in the Rockies. The experience we had in Salt Lake City was amazing. The people, the outdoors, the landscape, everything about the US we loved. So, it played a portion of it. Say, Michael Demain asked me to join him, and then Art Collins, and I, decided, okay, I'll do this. And it was really, I spent 4.5 years running this business for Medtronic. Great experience.
And then we came to your opportunity to join CVRx. So were you at a point in your career when you were interested in being CEO of a startup? Was that part of your plan? Did you have a plan?
No, not necessarily. At the time I was wondering whether the navigation business fit in Medtronic. or not. And we did some analysis, and there was some discussions and a lot of projects, a lot of negotiation. At the end of this, and through this, I met with some key investors, and then the recruiter for one of those investors, Michael Kelly, convinced me that it's the right time for me to be my own boss and run a business of my own. And it's interesting because July 2006, I was being evacuated with our children from Lebanon by the U.S. Marines on the helicopter carrier called USS Nashville from Lebanon to Cyprus.
In 2006?
We were on a landing craft, 2006, July. And so we were vacationing in Lebanon. We left the kids in Lebanon. My wife and I went to Greece, and, war broke between Israel and Hezbollah after Hezbollah kidnapped 7 soldiers from Israel. And then we had to be smuggled back into Lebanon to be with our children. And then we contacted the U.S. Embassy and the French Embassy, and then we got evacuated, right? We were on that landing craft unit heading to the helicopter carrier when my phone rang at 10 p.m. in the evening in Lebanon. So I thought, my parents had called me to tell me something important. So I answered. It was Michael Kelly, who was doing the recruitment for CVRx. And he was talking to me, imagine the scene. Here is this, landing craft unit number 8. I was on it, water to my knees, my 3-year-old daughter on my shoulders, and 2 helicopters over us, a hovercraft, 2 Zodiacs, plenty of Marine. And we're going like crazy with flares in the air, heading to the helicopter carrier. And he was like, Nadim, I want to talk to you about CVRx. And I said, Michael, it's, really not the time. He said, Nadim, I know every single CEO I call them. They say not the time. Let me tell you. I was like, trust me, this is not the time. Later on, when I told him the story after we returned back to the United States, he happened to have he's a West Point graduate in the, and did a stint in the Navy. And he loved us. So I became like his favorite candidate.
Oh, my goodness. So, wow, that's quite an experience. And the timing certainly is interesting that you'd get a phone call during that, but also just in that part of your life, did having that experience sort of, I don't know, knock you one way or the other, like saying, you know what, I'm ready for something new, for a new challenge. Time is short.
I grew up during the war in Lebanon, and I was with the first aid teams of the Red Cross for 6 years during the wartime. And I've seen a lot in my life, but that experience was different in a way. That was, I did everything to make sure that when my wife and I will get married and we'll have kids, we'll select a safe location, right, and try to grow them away from war. And here we are, putting them in this war context just because we were spending vacation in Lebanon and Greece. I felt miserable for that, That's
sure.
And when we were trying to get back to Lebanon, and we were in the Greek islands, so went to Athens, then to Cyprus, then to Damascus in Syria, then found a Syrian driver who would accept the risk for a lot of money to drive us under the fire to get us to Lebanon. It's a different experience when it's your children. When it's you, okay, it's okay. You feel like you're invincible, but your children, you feel that they know. It was a horrendous experience. Let me put it this way.
I can only imagine. I mean, they're extensions of yourself. So yeah, I can completely understand. And I would have to think that I often talk with people about, geez, you faced a real critical decision in your life, whether to leave this stable company and go start this startup. And how did you really measure those risks? I have to think, seeing what you've seen and having gone through that experience, the idea of joining a startup as a CEO probably didn't seem as scary as it might to some other people.
Oh, yeah, no. Joining CVRx was not scary at all. I mean, we had great investors, great data, the platform, the technology, the market we're going after. That was a no-brainer. I jumped into this really, with the convince the board that I'm the right CEO for this in both feats, and absolutely no hesitation and no fears.
So let's talk about CVRx. I mean, it's one of those companies that started with a grand idea, and you're still working on that, but it's taken a while to get to the point of commercialization. Let's talk about the early years, because you were using a device or developing a device that you hope would treat hypertension, pacemaker-like device. Then sort of renal denervation came in, and RDN came in, and sort of seemed to change the landscape for that. What was that process like of joining this company? You had the cutting edge technology. You were the pioneer in this. And then suddenly, literally, this flood of other companies with a rival technology and a rival approach, or an alternative approach, rivals too strong, came along to sort of potentially upset what you were doing. Did it upset what you were doing? How did you counter sort of the renal denervation surge into hypertension?
So let me start the story before I joined CVRx.
Okay.
The board at the time, I'm talking 2002, 2003, they invested in testing the hypothesis of our approach in canines, so in experimental studies in both heart failure and hypertension, and great results in both. But at the same time, in 2001, Medtronic got their first CRT, cardiac resynchronization therapy, approved late 2001, early 2002, so biventricular pacing, to go after heart failure. So the company said, why should we compete with Medtronic? Let's focus our efforts in hypertension. And then after Medtronic, Boston Scientific guided at the time with Companion, etc. But little did the company know back then that those CRT devices will not address all of heart failure. All right. And the company started then focusing on hypertension with the early, first-in-man studies, and then jumped into a pivotal trial. And that's when I was hired to enroll and execute the pivotal trial. We made few mistakes on our own. And then also the advent of renal denervation put us in a position where we had to change course in 2010. So let me start by our own mistakes. We jumped from a phase 1 trial in Europe, single arm, to a randomized control trial in the United States with a pivotal trial. The device at the time, the first generation, was not ready for that. So when we ran the trial, we had great data, great efficacy data from the trial. But the device was pretty invasive. 2 sites, electrode, big electrode, etc. 2003 and 2005, the company also did studies with not ablation, but surgical dissection of the renal nerves, to try to test our hypothesis that our device would work even if the kidney is out of the loop.
Interesting.
So they, this was before I joined CVRx, what they did was surgically denervate kidneys in animal subjects and verify the impact on blood pressure reduction, and then put our device in these subjects, and then turn our device on and verify that we can still reduce our blood pressure despite the fact that the kidney is denervated. And then in another experiment, they put our device first, test it, then surgically denervate the dogs, put our device off, test it, and then turn our device on while the dog now is denervated and test it. And we noticed that surgical denervation dropped blood pressure by a couple of millimeters, while our device we can easily drop by 15 to 20 millimeters in dogs. So there was no picture about the size effects. We did not think about doing a minimally invasive ablation solution because of what we've seen in our data. And those data were published in 2005 and in 2007 in major manuscripts. Mm-hmm. So 2009, the world started talking about Ardian, and then the company did a first-in-man study, pretty good data. Then they did a randomized control study in Europe and Australia, good data. Then they were acquired by Medtronic, and they ran their pivotal trial. So fast forward to 2010, we just had an issue with our pivotal trial in regard to the invasiveness of our therapy, number one. Number two, everybody now, the hype, everyone is talking about renal denervation. How do I position our therapy vis-a-vis renal denervation? When I looked at the data from the Simplicity 2 that Ardian ran, there was a couple of glaring points that were visible to me, but not to the general public about the data. I alerted our board about it, and I told our board, based on what I'm seeing and the trial design that is being rumored that Medtronic will be running, mm-hmm. I'm expecting that Medtronic will fail their trial. And if they do, it will hurt us. So my board was like, why? I mean, if it hurts them, it'll be good for us. I said, no, it will hurt us because the patient's funnel will flow. There'll be a bad reputation about device treatment for hypertension for a while, and the market may become toxic in terms of investments. At the same time, J&J was a serious investor inside CVRx. And from J&J's perspective, they really wanted to go after heart failure. That's why they did the initial investment in CVRx. So we got this confluence of all of the elements where we understand that in heart failure, there's a big section, almost 60% of the patients cannot be treated with CRT devices. J&J wants to go into heart failure at the time. I'm talking 2010. Renal denervation could, if it's successful, it would limit our attractiveness in the hypertension space. And if it fails, it would limit the attractiveness of the space itself. So add all of this together, we decided, let's double down. Let's develop a minimal invasive solution with our own technology and go after heart failure. And that's what we decided to do. And we started the human trials in heart failure in 2011. We did a first-in-man study. And then in 2012 to 2015, we did the phase 2 randomized control study. In 2016 to 2019, we did the phase 3, the pivotal trial that led to the approval a couple of months ago.
What sort of efforts go into steering the ship like that into a completely different application? I mean, it was part of your heritage. You weren't completely pivoting in something you hadn't seen before, but did that involve a change in employees and workforce and redesigning the how the company functioned, or was it merely just taking everyone and leading them into a different direction?
The biggest change was shifting our focus with our key clinical advisors we have. So while when you were running the hypertension trial, I had a weekly or bi-weekly calls with our hypertension steering committee. When we got into 2011, we shifted into a heart failure steering committee with a different set of physicians. Now, some of the physicians happen to be the same, like Dr. Bill Abraham was on both committees, but many of the members of the heart failure steering committee were pure heart failure doctors, and that's when we start getting involved with them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. We do not have a chief medical officer at CVRx. We rely on our external advisors to fill the gap.
Why do you go that route?
It's a choice. Controversial choice. There are advantages of having an in-house chief medical officer. When a doctor talks to another doctor, they have more credibility than us. On the other hand, also a doctor competes with another doctor, and we don't. It's instead of that competition of opinions, then we'll have a company that's really willing to actively listen to the advice of physicians. But it takes discipline, meaning we do not take any major decision without convening our panel of experts, so the steering committee. And we do listen to them. Sometimes we may not agree with them, and we discuss, and we come back with data. They'll come back with data until we end up in a place where we're all agreeing on the strategy. But we do listen. We actively seek their feedback and implement it.
And I would think if you're a CEO with a CMO, it would be easier to sort of let the CMO manage those relationships, and you would go focus on something else. This, I guess, requires you really to meet with those doctors and really talk to them and interact with them and understand what they're saying.
Yes, it does. I enjoy it, actually. I really enjoy it. And I had to learn statistics. I bought, statistics for dummies books and, statistics in a nutshell and stuff like this to try to figure out what they're talking about. I had to learn cardiology, the entire series of Braunwald's books on cardiology. I had to go through it. But at the same time, it's very interesting. Now I can sit down and have really interesting conversations with those key opinion leaders in cardiology.
So in 2016, you enrolled your first 2 patients in what was your pivotal trial, the BEAT-HF trial. Am I saying that right? And you had received positive data this year. What was that? Well, I don't want to summarize your entire trial experience in heart failure in those 3 years, but is this the trial we should be talking about? Is this the one that really sort of launched CVRx forward, the one where you received positive data this year?
Yes, absolutely. This is the trial. In April of 15, so this is a year before we enrolled the patients, we designed a trial, and then FDA issued a guidance called the Expedited Access Pathway, which later FDA renamed into Breakthrough Designation or Breakthrough Devices. This expedited access pathway guidance from FDA gave us a lot of new tools that we could use. So we immediately, so we're talking here early May of 2015, we submitted a request to the FDA that our product should be designated as a breakthrough device. And we got that designation. I think we may be the first product ever to receive this designation from FDA back then. And as soon as we received it, we took our trial design that we've finished a couple of months earlier, and we reshaped it totally into two distinct phases of the trial, a pre-market phase and a post-market phase. The pre-market phase will lead to a first approval, and the post-market phase will lead to a second approval. So think about it as two shots at goal with increasing amplitude or impact. The initial reaction from FDA in August of 2015, when we met with them to share with them our idea, was initial, I would say, discomfort with our approach on the statistics. They pushed back on us. They said, well, you have to go back and come back with a more serious proposal. So we escalated it within FDA. And it happened that we were maybe dancing faster than the music at CVRx, meaning the expedited access pathway guidance had not yet been implemented in FDA, and the training has not happened. So we were the guinea pig to a certain extent, and we used this experiment with FDA to allow FDA to figure out what they need to do internally. So we were learning as we go, and I put a picture often when I share this experience, you know, those race cars when you do a pit stop in a Formula One to change the wheels. Well, in our case, we're changing the wheels without stopping the car. We're still racing at the same time, changing the wheels and the tires. Anyway, so it was an interesting experience with FDA. To their credit, the leadership of FDA embraced this very strongly, and they really wanted to demonstrate that this new pathway has an impact. So they were willing to listen. Now, they did not lower the bar. They did not make it easier for us. It still took us 6 months of negotiation until the trial was fully approved in April of 16. And I tell you, when we first met in August, when I came back that weekend, I told my board, this is a non-starter. FDA is not listening. That was my impression of the first intense meeting with them. And it took us until April when not only we figured out that FDA is listening, actually FDA was helping us think about different ways of, strengthening our trial design. And for a while during this period, we had a weekly call with FDA where we had our physician and their physicians, our statistician and their statisticians, each had their own call and thinking about, okay, how can we address this specific problem and so forth. It was a very intense period. And that, I think that experience has helped the FDA of setting the stage and the tone inside of FDA of how do they approach, trial designs for breakthrough devices. And the trial design that we end up with became, I think, a test case for FDA. And I've seen a slide that looks like our trial design been used by FDA in so many opportunities. Initially, they use our own colors, and I've asked FDA, can you use the blue color from FDA and not the green color from CVRx, please? Just as a joking, right? But seriously, this was a collaborative effort between FDA and us. So they owned this design as much as we did. And I've seen other companies recently using a very similar trial design. The most recent one I've seen is LivaNova. They are going after heart failure, and their trial design uses the same approach that we innovated with FDA on in 2016. So this is the trial. We finished the pre-market phase of this trial. We got the first approval, and now we're continuing in the post-market phase, seeking the second approval.
I want to get into that in a moment and talk about your role at AdvaMed, but I'm just curious. You were leading AdvaMed. You were advocating for the medtech industry, obviously discussing the FDA and its interactions with the industry. Were you ever concerned that your leadership role, any comments you had to make about the FDA, perhaps even critical comments, would affect your relationship or CVRx's relationship with the agency?
Oh yeah, it's always a concern. And During my tenure, we're also negotiating the MEDUFA user fee program. There were some contentious between FDA and us about, maybe FDA is shifting back their culture into the, some of the old demons back then. And I had to play sometimes the role of raising concerns that our 400 members at AdvaMed were saying. So I have to raise these to FDA. But to their credit, FDA never held me responsible or tried to punch back on me or on my company in this regard. So from that perspective, if anybody has any concern about becoming chairman of AdvaMed or taking a leadership role with the association, it did not hurt CVRx. It did not hurt me. I can say maybe it's convoluted, right? Because FDA knew that I was playing this role at AdvaMed, and they knew that it was not me being wanting to be critical of FDA. I was just relaying the voice I'm hearing from the industry. At the same time, it gave me credibility, meaning I became a known entity to FDA. Right? It doesn't mean that they lowered the bar or they gave me any preferred treatment, right, compared to other companies. But when I said something, FDA could not just simply ignore it. They had to look into it because they knew I was credible. So that credibility factor could have played a positive role for CVRx in our negotiations with FDA.
And how are you set for financing? I think by my count, you've raised roughly 250 million, or am I not sure? Am I not close with that as to money raised from venture capitalists?
You may be off by 100 or so, but yeah, it has been an expensive
100 here,
journey.
100
Yeah,
there.
who's counting, right? No, it has been an expensive journey. I cannot reiterate this enough. Developing a platform technology like this that will be applicable in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction today, but in the future in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, in resistant hypertension, possibly in chronic kidney disease, in arrhythmia, and so forth, takes money, takes investment, takes time. That's the unfortunate part of things.
Does it still have to? I mean, if you were to start a company like this today, does it still require $200, $300 million? Because that would seem to be a game changer, or that would be a real red flag, I think, for most venture capitalists out there. Or is that obsession about the dollars kind of move past us?
I think PMA product lines would require at least $100 million of investment to get to the approval line, but the approval line is not the exit. If you look at the state of today's economy and the strategy of most consolidators in our space, 10, 15 years ago, you develop a cool technology and you'll get bought. So the exit for the VCs will be sooner and faster. Now it's longer. Not only the company has to prove the technology, so they retire the technical risk, they also have retired the clinical risk, they have to retire the regulatory risk, they have to retire the reimbursement risk, and they have to retire the adoption risk and the market development. So until we get to this point, a lot of money has to be invested in the company. And that's the sad state of our affairs today. It's driven by the shifting role of the consolidators. And the end result of this is that most of the venture money these days is going into the last two portion of what I was just saying here, which was the reimbursement risk retirements and the adoption risk retirements. A lot of VC money is being spent on developing sales forces to raise the revenue level to a certain extent where the acquisition will become accretive to a consolidator or to become an IPO candidate. That money that's being raised by VCs to do this commercial development is not being spent or invested in novel technologies or innovation. Mm-hmm. When I looked at some statistics I did this analysis with Aaron Sadowski. I think I did this in 2014, 2015. So you look at the amount of money it used to take in average. So this is a combined data from 510Ks and PMA product line. From inception to exit from a VC's perspective, in 2004, the average was $32 million, and it was 5 years. By 2014, the average was 74 million, and the timeline extended to 11 years. And that's an average. And now remember, 90% of the products are 510Ks, if not more. Okay. So those are the numbers that created a concern for many of the VCs. So the traditional VC model where you raise $100 million and you invest in 20 companies doesn't work anymore. And that's why we're seeing those big, large cap, large funds becoming the staples in our industry, like NEA, if you think about it. And we're seeing Deerfield, we're seeing KCK and others. So they can swing a large portfolio. They have a staying power more than 10 years, and they can do these PMA developments. Now, the return justifies the investment. It takes time and it takes money.
How does the CVRx story play into those concerns about medtech? Do you see this now that you have approval as being a positive example, or is the money you raised, you think, going to be adding to the concern? Has it added to the concern about the sector?
Yeah, I'm not worried about the example we're setting. I think our product is one of those unicorns where, every single company and every single technology, they always love to talk about the $1 billion market potential. But when you think about our therapy, we have the potential here of making the single largest product platform in the medtech space, period. Much larger than anything else that exists. Our initial market potential right now is twice the market potential of CRT devices, and we're alone. So, just adding the numbers, it's staggering. So a product platform like ours requires a lot of investment to develop the full potential. You cannot cut corners. But not all products would require these amount of investment, these large trials, these expensive R&D development, and so forth.
So how do your investors exit CVRx? What's your plan? Do you have to make this an IPO company?
Our investors are not focusing on exit. That's the good news for CVRx. We're in here to build a company, a sustainable enterprise.
And do you think you'll have to raise any more money, or do you have what you need?
Oh yes, we always raise money, whether private or public is a question mark, but we need to raise money. It seems it's never stopped, right?
I forgot who I'm talking to.
You may ask Jeff Bezos the same about Amazon. Do you need to keep raising money for Amazon? And he would say yes. So, some platforms like this would require a lot of investment to unlock the potential. But we're talking here, a huge market potential at the end.
Great. And final topic, I'm glad we're spending a lot of time on yourself and on CVRx, but we've talked about AdvaMed, and you talked a bit about what your experience leading that entity. What was your takeaway though from your year leading that group? And give us, if you would, just sort of a state of medtech on a broader basis. You talked a bit about the private side of things, but how is the sector overall feel from your point of view?
My first reaction is it was an amazing experience. I end up, interacted with a lot of amazing people within AdvaMed, around the board and the member companies of AdvaMed. But also, paradoxically, in Washington, D.C., we hear a lot of criticism. But my experience here working with staffers and politicians from all sides was an amazing experience. I would, if I can do it again, I will do it again in a heartbeat. The state of the industry is, in a nutshell, is the following. We are currently in probably one of the best states our industry has ever been into in terms of future prospects. If there was a golden time to invest in the medtech space, today is this time. And you know what they say, right? You don't skate where the puck is, you skate to where the puck is going to, right? Mm-hmm. And here's the same situation. We have removed a lot of obstacles that flattened our return on investment over the past years. But when you look at the projected return on investment in future years, it is going to be amazing. You still have a lot of cheap stocks right now in the medtech space and a lot of private companies that you can invest in right now, and a lot of new technologies that you can develop with novel pathways, including the breakthrough devices by FDA a novel pathway for reimbursement, including what they just announced regarding the breakthrough devices as well. That's the time to go into the medtech space. This is the time to invest. Now, I started feeling this, the tide turning about 3 or 4 years ago, and I started talking with a little bit more of optimism. Some of my colleagues were critical of me. Some of my peers were critical of me. They said, Nadim, if we're too optimistic in here, how could people come and help us remove these obstacles? It's fair criticism. I take it. I accept it. Maybe I'm an over-optimist. I'm a glass half full guy type of a guy. But at the same time, it is real. And we've seen these trends changing. We've seen, many of the large cap and medium cap companies going up. We've seen some phenomenal IPOs done in the medtech space. So it is turning. And this is the time to invest now, not yesterday and not tomorrow.
All right. Well, that is a great way to end this conversation. It's been a true pleasure, Nadim, to get to know you and to hear your story. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
All right, well, that is a wrap. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly podcast. Again, we'll have my second conversation with Nadim next week, in addition to another great interview that I'm working on. So please do tune in. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi. You can find me on Twitter at MedTechTom. You can also send me an email. I am tsalemi@wtwhmedia.com. Of course, my podcast partner is available as well. You can find him on LinkedIn as Chris Newmarker. He is on Twitter at Newmarker, as in a new marker. And his email is cnewmarker@wtwhmedia.com. Finally, please share this podcast. Please give us a ranking on this podcast. If you do share this podcast on social media, tag Chris and myself. We'd love to be part of that conversation. And finally, don't forget to subscribe. That way you'll get future podcasts sent directly to you. It's very heartening to see how many people listen to this podcast the minutes it comes out. It's great to have people subscribe to this. They get it sent right to their phones or whatever they're using to listen to podcasts. That's it, folks. Again, tune in next week. We'll have part 2 of my conversation with Nadim. And don't forget to check out DeviceTalks.com for information about our upcoming Device Talks Tuesdays. Take care, everyone. Have a happy 4th and a terrific weekend. And as Chris Newmarker says, stay safe.